Yeah,
bro.
who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a fucking screw in a fucking piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great. And at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. You don't have somebody building your shit. It doesn't fucking matter.
Andrew Wilson and Destiny got into a very heated debate. That, of course, got very personal, as would normally happen with Destiny and Andrew Wilson. Things always get personal, but this time it's one of the worst debates I've ever seen, and one of the worst reactions I've ever seen from losing a debate from Destiny's side of things. He absolutely melted down, started screaming at the top of his lungs, and it's just embarrassing here from Destiny. Let's get into this clip here where Andrew Wilson absolutely annihilates Destiny for all of his ridiculously woke takes here live on Andrew Wilson's show. Or actually, I think this actually streamed on Playing with Fire, but regardless, Destiny has a meltdown here as Andrew Wilson absolutely destroys all of his talking points. Let's check it out.
Kind of smuggled in is you talk about institutions being the protectors of rights. Institutions are just a coalition of people, individuals. They're going to rely on the enforcement arm also of men. You say it's not masculine men who are defending these rights. However, it is masculine men who are in the military, in law enforcement, things like this, who are the enforcement arm of these rights, who these government institutions rely heavily on in order to enforce what their will is. So it always does come down to enforcement.
Do you think then that the countries where women have the most rights are the countries with the most masculine, strong men?
So they're not mutually exclusive or non-exclusive.
I didn't say they're mutually exclusive. I'm asking because you make it sound like it's just strong men that grant rights. So does that mean that if I were to look at all the women's rights in the world,
there's a problem there. There's a smuggle in again where you say strong masculine men are the only ones doing them. I'm just saying men is the default are the ones who are doing this.
Wait, but why do you say men are the default? Like, we can run that back a little bit more reductively. Shouldn't it be 6 feet or taller men? Like, don't all men that are 5'8" and lower get their rights from men that are 6 feet and taller?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't have a non-equalization on force. A 5'8" person can defend themselves against a 6-foot person.
In general, do you think that's true?
I think that there are some advantages, but if you're going to do that, then on average,
no, not some advantages. I'm saying on average, if we look at combat sports with no weight classes, you think 5'8" men are defending?
Well, hang on. So if we're going to use averages, then let's use averages and say that we have an average for a reason because most men are inside of that average. Right? So if that's true, then most of the men who would be falling in these jobs are going to be within that average, Destiny. So
sure, but I'm just asking if we run this all the way back. So any man that's below the average height, any man that's 5'9" or lower, their rights are also being defended by men that are 6'2" and taller.
Well, no, that wouldn't be a direct correlate for equalization because men who are 6 foot, because men who are 6 foot, there's far fewer of them than men who are in the average aggregate. So therefore, the force equalization is different. However, if you're looking at the force differential from men to women, the average is so lopsided that even weak men can generally defend themselves fairly well against strong women.
If you want to do force equalization there, then shouldn't we be looking at people that prefer a heavily patriarchal society versus people that prefer a more egalitarian one? And the force equalization for women on the egalitarian one would be probably that most men would side with that over the ones that want the heavily patriarchal one?
Yeah, but that would go with my point, which is that men are the ones who are the rights givers.
But men aren't just the rights givers there, because a coalition of 5'9" and shorter men with women are probably going to defend rights more than a coalition of 6 foot plus alpha men.
But the distinction there is that you said it yourself, it would be a coalition of men and women, but it'll never be women. So it'll always have to be men.
And it'll never be 5'8" and lower men, I don't think,
no,
right?
it will always be. The default will always go to men. Men can always...
I don't understand this. Like, what are people like Destiny's obsession with acting like men and women aren't extremely different when it comes to physicality? I don't get it. It's an irrational, not even physicality. We're just different. Our biology is different. Our brains work differently. Our chemistry is different. I really just don't understand. Let me know in the comments what it is, what they're seeing, because I really just can't get it. And I've never in my life found it difficult to accept these facts. Maybe it's because I'm a man, and a lot of these things people try and argue that aren't actually differences. That's the things that make men, I guess, superior to women or different from them. It's not as fun to be like, you have less control over your life because you can't defend yourself in as many situations as men can. So it's better to just pretend as if you can defend yourself. Or it's not as fun to be worse at sports because you don't have the testosterone side of things. So therefore, we're supposed to pretend like women aren't worse at sports than men. I just never understood why we have to pretend. And maybe it's just because I'm a man, so the things that make us different actually are more fun for me. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. Please let me know your opinion, because Destiny's also a man and he's still arguing for the other side. still, arguing for the stance that we're not that different at all, and we shouldn't have laws to separate us because of how different we are. It's never been hard for me to wrap my head around that and accept these facts. And I'm curious to see what you all think in the comments about this, because every time I say stuff like this, you lose your minds. I've said in a couple videos ago about it's ridiculous that women who play basketball at a very mediocre level, so mediocre that I guarantee you if I was to go pick up 4 random people from my gym who are playing pickup basketball and we go and play against a college or WNBA team, we would have a decent game on our hands, right? Like, it's just ridiculous that they just want way more money when their leagues are already bleeding money. They're losing money year over year. Maybe with Caitlin Clark, she can save the league. I don't know. That's a conversation for a different time. But let me know in the comments what you think, please.
To rights collectively.
Okay, so you just want to arbitrarily cut it off at just men, but not go into any of the delineations.
I just went into every delineation with you. Which one would you like to go into?
I mean, I already said it. I think that you could argue that taller men are the ones that run society, and shorter men only exist in society essentially at the behest of larger men, basically.
Yeah, but we just covered this. That's true. You could say that, but if you're looking at an average, then you're saying that the men who are outside of the average are fewer in number than the men who are in the average. So they're outnumbered. So I don't know what your point is.
I mean, it could be the slightly taller men could probably take on 1.5 shorter men. I'm sure we could find some average where 30% of men in society can run the other 70%.
And it's still
just
men.
like nobody looks at.
And it's still men.
Sure.
That's the point.
It is men, but now I'm going into height. But you want to go back on just the man, the fact that it's like the man thing. But again, and to go very broad, because now, I mean, I feel like we kind of see how ridiculous the argument is, and just like saying just men, just men, just men.
I haven't heard you refute it.
Broadly speaking, right, it's hard to refute because it's almost unfalsifiable, because you're talking about half the population of the planet, right? Like, how am I supposed to refute that men are important in guarding rights? There are no countries that exist without men. But when I try to think of like, well, what's the reputation of this? Here would be an interesting thing. Do the countries with the strongest men have the most rights? Not really, no. In fact, just the opposite. I remember hearing so many jokes about how because Russia is so masculine and manly that all the trans Ukrainian soldiers were going to be getting murdered by the brave Russian soldiers. And here we've got drone operators, tossing grenades on Russian troops blowing themselves, right? So it doesn't seem to be the case that like just strong men are the predictor of rights.
So hang on, wait a second.
Go for it.
So men can take your rights away in those other countries too?
No, not just men. Those countries can take your rights away. You need a whole
institution. Using the enforcement arm of who? Which sex do you think's the enforcement arm?
Countries are powered by men and women. When the Soviet Union beat Nazi Germany, when the Soviet, it's not just about the enforcement arm. Who's giving them the arms to enforce?
Usually other men.
Who manufactures the guns? Who manufactures?
Do you think that there's female gun makers all over the world, or what?
Yeah, who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a fucking screw in a fucking piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great, and at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. You don't have somebody building your shit. It doesn't fucking matter.
Oh, man. Destiny and Andrew Wilson just got him so bad right there. Look, Destiny, you got to give it to him. He's pretty good at debating. It's not often where you're going to see a very obvious moment where Destiny's kind of lost for words, cornered, whatever. And that really might have been one of the moments right there where Andrew Wilson was like, yeah, they're putting little screws inside of the gun. They're following clear instructions. We could teach a monkey how to do that. We could teach a robot how to do that. They're not designing the weapons. And Destiny had nothing to say about that. So he's just like, at the end of the day, a long pause. Both jobs are important. Yeah, they're not equally as important though, dumbass. And that's the point we're trying to make here. There's just a very obvious discrepancy as to which job is more important. Is it putting the screws together and following the clear instructions that the man who invented the gun told you to do? Or is it putting the actual screw in? Which one is a higher leverage position to be in? Just watch that back. Where Destiny's literally lost for words.
Gun makers all over the world, or what?
Yeah, who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a fucking screw in a fucking piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great, and at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. If you don't have somebody building your shit, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, that's nice. Women can be a labor force if men allow them to. That's fantastic.
Sure. And what I'm saying, you can say if men allow them to, however you want to say it or whatever, but the reality is at the end of the day, it's not just men, right? You need both halves of society working together to actually fucking accomplish anything. So there is no society or country that's like...
You're smuggling in just men, again. You're smuggling in just men. What I'm saying to you specifically is that men are the enforcement arm, and nobody's building shit if men say no. That's what I'm saying. Women aren't going to be able to go to men and say, no, you know what? We're going to do it anyway if men don't want them to, Destiny. That's the distinction.
Well,
Here comes a strong woman to disagree with what he's saying, and that's where nobody cares anymore. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about Andrew Wilson absolutely destroying Destiny here to the point where Destiny was completely and literally lost for words, like you don't see him do very often. Let me know in the comments what you think about this whole Andrew Wilson versus Destiny situation here.